A $30 bottle sits on a nursery shelf. Inside it, a synthetic copy of something a willow tree gives away for free. Every year, millions of gardeners reach for that little bottle of rooting hormone powder, trusting the label, paying the price, and never once questioning where the real science came from. But here is what the label never mentions. The most powerful rooting compound on Earth was not invented in a laboratory. It was discovered growing wild beside a riverbank, in the branches of a tree that has been cloning itself for 65 million years. This video reveals a 3-ingredient method, using things already sitting in most kitchens, that gives plant cuttings the same biological advantage as any commercial product. Maybe better. And the total cost? Practically nothing. But there is a catch. One small mistake in this process, a mistake even experienced gardeners make without realizing it, can kill a perfectly healthy cutting in 48 hours. That mistake will be exposed before this video ends, so stay for the whole thing. It might save an entire season of cuttings. 1. The corporate secret. The illusion of the $30 miracle. Walk into any garden center. Head to the propagation aisle. There it is, a tiny plastic bottle of rooting hormone priced somewhere between $20 and $30. Now consider this. The active ingredient inside, indole 3-butyric acid, or IBA, costs roughly $2 per gram when purchased in bulk. That little retail bottle contains a fraction of a gram, mixed with talc powder. The markup is staggering. But the price is not the real issue. The real issue is the story that gets sold alongside it. The idea that plant propagation is some kind of high-tech operation requiring laboratory chemicals. That without their product, cuttings will fail. Stop and think about that for a moment. How did roses travel across continents in the pockets of immigrants who owned nothing? How did grandmothers pass down hydrangea cuttings wrapped in damp newspaper long before anyone had heard of synthetic hormones? They succeeded because rooting is not a chemical transaction. It is a biological event that plants have been performing on their own for millions of years. When a stem is severed from a plant, something remarkable happens at the wound site. The plant floods that area with its own natural auxin, a hormonal signal that tells ordinary cells to stop what they are doing and start building roots instead. Scientists call this an auxin pulse. It is the plant's emergency response, and it is entirely self-generated. Commercial rooting powders simply deliver a concentrated synthetic version of that same signal. They work. No one is denying that. But the Earth already provides the original, in forms that are more complex, more protective, and entirely free. The next section reveals the first one, and it grows beside almost every stream and pond in the country. Two, Mother Nature's aspirin, the magic of willow water. Has anyone ever watched a willow branch fall into water? Not a carefully prepared cutting, just a broken branch, snapped off by wind, dropped into a muddy creek. Within days, white roots begin pushing out from the bark. No rooting powder, no sterile potting mix, just raw, unstoppable vitality. That is not an accident. Willow trees, every species in the Salix genus, are quietly manufacturing two compounds that commercial nurseries spend millions trying to replicate. The first is indole 3-butyric acid, IBA, the exact same root-stimulating hormone sold in those $30 bottles. Willows produce it naturally, in abundance, especially in young green tips during spring growth. But here is what makes willow truly extraordinary, something most gardening books never mention. The second compound is salicylic acid. If that name sounds familiar, it should. Salicylic acid is the natural precursor to aspirin, used for centuries to treat pain and inflammation. In plants, it does something different, something brilliant. When a cutting is taken, when that stem is sliced away from its mother plant, the single greatest threat is not dehydration. It is infection. Bacteria and fungi in the soil attack the open wound before roots have any chance to form. It is a race, root before rot. Salicylic acid triggers what scientists call systemic acquired resistance. Think of it as a vaccine. The cutting's immune system switches on before any pathogen arrives. The stem is pre-armed, ready to fight off infection while it quietly builds new roots underground. No commercial rooting powder offers that dual action, hormone and immune defense in the same treatment. Making willow water is simple. Gather a handful of young, green willow twigs, about 10 to 15 pieces. Strip the leaves. Cut the twigs into 1-inch segments. Drop them into 2 cups of boiling water. Let the mixture steep for 24 hours. Strain the liquid. That amber-colored water is now loaded with natural IBA and salicylic acid. The cost? 0. The nearest willow tree is the pharmacy. But willow water alone leaves one vulnerability exposed. The wound itself is still open. And that is where the next ingredient enters, one that ancient civilizations understood long before modern science caught up. 3. The golden seal, the antimicrobial power of raw honey. For generations, folk gardeners have whispered about dipping cuttings in honey, and for just as long, laboratory scientists have dismissed the idea. Their argument? Honey contains absolutely no rooting hormones, no auxins, no IBA, and they are correct. But they miss the bigger picture, badly. Honey is not a hormone. It is a bodyguard. Raw, unpasteurized honey is one of the most inhospitable environments for bacteria and fungi on the planet. It is highly acidic. Its moisture content is so low that it literally dehydrates microorganisms on contact. And here is the part that makes it remarkable. When raw honey is diluted with water, enzymes inside it react to produce hydrogen peroxide, a natural disinfectant generated right at the wound site. But honey does something else that no one talks about. Rooting is expensive work for a tiny cutting. That little stem has no roots to draw up nutrients. It is running on whatever stored energy it had when it was cut. The natural sugars and carbohydrates in honey provide a localized energy source, fuel for the intense cellular division happening at the base of the stem. So honey protects the wound and feeds the process. 2 jobs, 1 ingredient. Now, here is a critical warning, and this is a mistake that ruins more cuttings than people realize. Never dip a cutting into thick, undiluted honey straight from the jar. Pure honey has intense osmotic pressure. Instead of helping the cutting, it will suck moisture directly out of the delicate stem tissue, causing severe dehydration and cell death. The cutting shrivels from the very thing meant to save it. The correct method: dissolve 1 tablespoon of raw honey into 2 cups of warm water. That diluted solution becomes a gentle, antiseptic, energy-rich bath, soothing instead of destructive. The wound is now sealed. The immune system is armed. Energy is flowing. But there is one more threat hiding in the soil. A silent killer that can undo all of this work overnight. 4. The ancient fungicide, Ceylon cinnamon. This is the threat nobody warns about until it is too late. The damp-off complex. A group of aggressive soil fungi, Fusarium, Pythium, Rhizoctonia, that attack the base of a cutting right where it meets the soil. The stem turns black. It softens. It collapses. And by the time the damage is visible above the surface, the cutting is already dead. For slow-rooting plants, heirloom roses, lavender, woody herbs, this fungal attack is the #1 killer. The cutting needed 4 weeks to root. The fungi needed 4 days to destroy it. The defense has been sitting in the pantry all along. Cinnamon, specifically pure Ceylon cinnamon, is rich in a compound called cinnamaldehyde. This compound does not stimulate roots. It does something arguably more important. It destroys fungi. Cinnamaldehyde disrupts the cell membranes of fungal spores. When cinnamon powder is applied to the wet base of a cutting, it forms both a physical barrier and a chemical shield. As the powder slowly dissolves into the moist soil around the stem, it creates a sterile protective zone, a halo where no fungal spore can survive. One important distinction: Not all cinnamon is the same. The cheap cinnamon in discount store spice racks is almost always cassia cinnamon. It has a lower concentration of cinnamaldehyde and a significantly higher level of coumarin, a compound that, at high doses, can actually damage plant tissue. Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes labeled true cinnamon, has far more cinnamaldehyde and far less coumarin. It is the one worth using. 3 ingredients. 3 layers of protection. Now it is time to put them together. 5. The triple dip synergy method. 3 steps. 3 natural ingredients. $0 from a nursery shelf. Start with a healthy cutting. A rose stem taken in late spring just after a bloom has faded works beautifully. Cut it to pencil thickness, about 6 inches long, with a clean, sharp blade. Step 1. Stand the bottom 2 inches of the cutting in homemade willow water. Leave it there for 4 to 6 hours. For woody stems, roses, camellias, hydrangeas, overnight soaking gives even better results. During this time, the cutting draws indole 3-butyric acid and salicylic acid deep into its vascular system. The rooting hormone is delivered. The immune system is activated. Step 2. Remove the cutting from the willow water and dip the base into the diluted raw honey solution. 1 tablespoon of honey dissolved in 2 cups of warm water. This creates a sweet, antiseptic, energy-rich seal over the wound. Step 3. While the honey solution is still wet on the stem, lightly dust the very tip with pure Ceylon cinnamon powder. The powder clings to the moisture, forming an antifungal fortress around the most vulnerable point of the cutting. That is it. The cutting now carries the same rooting hormone found in commercial products, plus an immune shield, an antimicrobial seal, an energy source, and a fungal barrier, none of which the $30 bottle provides. The corporate product gives 1 thing. Nature gives 5. No willow tree? No problem. Not everyone lives near a willow. Nature has backups. Fresh aloe vera gel, sliced straight from the leaf, contains over 75 active constituents, including natural growth hormones. Research has shown it significantly increases both the number and length of roots, even on difficult woody plants like grapevines and aspens. Fresh coconut water is another powerhouse. It is nature's embryo support system, designed to sustain a coconut seedling on a barren beach with nothing but sand. It is loaded with auxins and cytokinins, the 2 hormone groups that drive root and shoot development. Either of these can replace willow water in the triple dip method. The honey and cinnamon steps remain exactly the same. Now comes the part of this process where the most damage is done, and where almost every gardener, no matter how experienced, has lost cuttings without understanding why. 6. The perilous journey, from water to soil. This is the mistake promised at the beginning of this video, the one that kills more cuttings than disease, drought, and neglect combined. Picture this. A cutting has been rooting in a glass of water on a sunny windowsill for 3 weeks. Beautiful white roots are trailing through the water. It looks healthy. It looks ready. The gardener carefully lifts the cutting, digs a hole in a pot of fresh potting soil, tucks it in, waters it, and waits. Within a week, the leaves turn yellow. The stem goes limp. The cutting dies. Why? Because roots grown in water and roots grown in soil are fundamentally different structures. Water roots are thin, translucent, and delicate. They have never had to push through resistance. They have never had to search for oxygen because they have been bathed in it. They are built for comfort, not survival. Soil roots are thick, sturdy, and tough. They are built to shove through dense, heavy material to find moisture and nutrients. When a fragile water root is suddenly buried in dense, wet potting mix, it suffocates. The oxygen disappears. The physical pressure crushes tissue never designed to bear it. The plant goes into shock. And shock, for a tiny cutting with no reserves, is fatal. The solution is not to avoid water rooting. The solution is to build a bridge between the 2 worlds. Method 1. The airy mix. Instead of standard potting soil, Prepare a blend of 40% perlite, 30% fine bark chips, and 30% standard potting mix. This creates thousands of tiny air pockets in the growing medium. The water roots can breathe. They toughen up gradually, adapting to resistance without being crushed by it. Method 2, and this is the elegant one, the slurry method. While the cutting is still rooting in its glass of water, start adding 1 small spoonful of potting mix to the water every day. Do not stir aggressively, just let it settle. Over 7 to 10 days, the clear water slowly transforms into mud. The roots, still alive and growing, gradually adapt to the weight, the texture, and the nutrient profile of soil. By the time the cutting is transplanted, the roots already know what dirt feels like. No shock, no collapse. Just a gentle, gradual crossing from one world into the next. Growth, in the garden and in life, cannot be rushed. The strongest roots are never the ones forced into hard ground. They are the ones given room to breathe, time to toughen, and a gentle hand guiding the transition. Somewhere right now, a willow branch is lying in a stream. By tomorrow morning, it will have roots. No laboratory, no price tag, no plastic bottle from a garden center shelf. Just life, doing what life has always done. The willow offers its hormones. The honeybee offers its sweet protection. The cinnamon tree offers its fierce defense. All of it free, all of it waiting. The next time a favorite rose is in full bloom, take a cutting. Treat it with the strength of the willow, the grace of honey, and the shield of cinnamon. Give it air, give it time, and watch something beautiful take root. That is not just gardening, that is $30 back in the pocket, and a connection to the same ancient knowledge that kept grandmother's garden alive. If this video changed the way you think about your garden, subscribe to Rooted in Grace. More buried knowledge is coming. Share this with a friend who loves their garden. They deserve to know this too. Until next time, hands in the dirt, eyes toward the sun, and roots deep in grace.